Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very special Remembrance Day event. My name is Jeff Russell, and on behalf of the Geelong Regional Library Corporation, I'd like to welcome you to this live webinar event, World War I Honour Boards, Remembering the Women and Men of the Geelong Region, celebrating the culmination of the Geelong Honours Them project. The Geelong Regional Library Corporation acknowledges Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar original owners of the lands on which our library services operate. We pay respect to Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and celebrate First Nations people of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story. We'd also like to acknowledge that this is NAIDOC Week, and this year's theme is Always Was, Always Will Be, which recognises that First Nations people have occupied and cared for this continent for over 65,000 years. Today on Remembrance Day, we also acknowledge those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have served in all wars since Federation. Now, while the exact number is not known, it's estimated that 1,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women served in the First World War. Despite the injustices that Indigenous people experienced back then in Australia and continue to experience, they served side by side with non-Indigenous soldiers, and they continue to proudly serve in Australia's Defence Forces today. Now, some of you might know that I have a professional and personal interest in local history and photography, so I'm delighted and proud to be your MC for today's event. Just a few housekeeping reminders before we get started. We'd love you to participate in today's webinar by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, then typing your questions or comments and hit return to send them in to us. If you're using an iPad or an iPhone to join us, you might need to touch your screen to see the Q&A button at the bottom. You're welcome to post at any time, ready for our guests to consider later in today's event. Also note that this webinar is being recorded, so if you'd like to watch this discussion again or recommend it to your friends or family, we'll upload it to the library's YouTube channel for viewing on demand within the next couple of days. Now, it's my very great pleasure to introduce today's special guest, the Honourable Christine Cousins, State Member of Parliament for Geelong, to officially commemorate this important historical project. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you, Jeff. Can I begin by acknowledging the original owners of the land, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to ancestors past, present and future. And I also wish to acknowledge this week is NAIDOC Week. Always was, always will is the theme. And I want to also acknowledge any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. And thank you for the care of our land and waterways. Can I also acknowledge Mark Beasley, Manager, Geelong Regional Library Centre, Dr. Jeff Russell, Lieutenant Colonel Neil C. Smith, AM, Ms. Lynn Bryant, Dr. Ruth Lee, and all other guests and contributors who supported this project. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this webinar today to honour World War I men and women of the Greater Geelong region through the Geelong Honours Them project. I'm delighted to be here representing the Minister for Veterans, the Honourable Sean Leane MP. The Victorian Government recognises the importance of acknowledging and honouring the Victorian men and women who served and sacrificed on behalf of their country. It is important to understand the courage and determination of those who contributed to the freedoms we all enjoy today. That is why the Victorian Government provides grant programs that support local communities and organisations like Geelong Regional Libraries to preserve the legacy of the brave men and women of Victoria. I congratulate the Geelong Regional Libraries on driving this project across the 4 local government areas of the City of Greater Geelong, the Borough of Queenscliff, Surf Coast Shire and Golden Plains Shire. It is my understanding that between 150 and 200 of these World War I honour boards are now online, providing significant records of people's World War I war service and social history information. The Geelong Peace Memorial has numerous honour boards on its walls, but they were only accessible to the public on days of special remembrance. This project now provides ongoing and unlimited digital access to all World War I honour boards within the Peace Memorial. The Geelong Honours Them website creates an ongoing legacy accessible to anyone here in Victoria, Australia and overseas. It is an excellent research tool for people seeking an individual connection to a local community, and it will be extremely beneficial to social and cultural history students who are researching the Victorian community during World War I. To succeed, this project required a great deal of collaboration. Firstly, Geelong Regional Libraries engaged the community by placing a call out for the whereabouts of World War I honour boards, and they received a terrific response. Once the honour boards were located, the libraries secured the support of local camera clubs, including the Geelong Camera Club, Corio Bay Club, and the Bellarine Camera Club, who digitally photographed all of the World War I honour boards so they could be uploaded to the new website. I congratulate Geelong Regional Library Centre, its project manager Mark Beasley, and all its supporters for your collective passion and efforts to keep local history alive and instigating this new project, Geelong Honours Them. I know it will be appreciated by many, and thank you all all the best for today's webinar. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Christine, for joining us today. And our sincere thanks also to the Victorian Government for supporting this project through the Victoria Remembers Major Grant Program.
Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce and welcome Mr. Mark Beasley. Mark is manager of the Geelong Heritage Centre Collection and Services, a role he's held for the past 12 years. He's also the project manager for the Geelong Honours Them project. Mark has over 20 years experience managing and working with archive collections, genealogy resources and special collections, both locally and nationally. Mark has assisted in research and appeared as an expert on TV programs nationally and internationally, including Who Do You Think You Are and the ABC's Can We Help? Now, since its commencement in 2008, Mark has led the Geelong Honours Them project to locate and then digitally photograph World War I honour boards across the city of Greater Geelong, the borough of Queenscliff, the Golden Plains and the Surf Coast Shires. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Well done to you.
Thank you.
Mark, I've got a couple of questions for you because I'm very keen to learn more about this project. How did the Geelong Honours Them project come about? Was there something that created the interest in it in the first place?
Yes, look, Jeff, there was, and it's really interesting, I guess, the thread that flows through this project, and it stems from its very beginnings. How it sort of came about was about 15 years ago, the Geelong Family History Group embarked on a project, a volunteer project, to locate and take down information about honour boards across the Geelong and wider region. They weren't specifically World War I honour boards. There was a mix of World War I honour boards, World War II honour boards, and even club honour boards. They gave that piece of work to the Heritage Centre about 10 years ago now, and it just struck me as something that needed to be used and to be expanded in some way. And moving forward a bit to the Anzac Centenary period, we were then able to sort of flesh out a project about focusing on World War I honour boards and set about applying for some funding. And we were fortunate enough to secure that funding that Christine and yourself have mentioned. The idea being that we would focus on World War I honour boards, try and expand on the data that they gave us. The Family History Group, Geelong Family History Group, didn't actually photograph the honour boards at that time. They took down information and the names on them. But I thought it was important if we could try and capture those honour boards in a digital sense and make them available to the wider community. It was going to be something that would create a legacy for the next 100 years, I guess. Why did we choose World War I honour boards is a question we're often asked, and it's a good one. But I think there's some really good rationale behind it. typically your war memorials you will find outside, so they're more easily accessible and you can read them and look at them and understand them. Honour boards are typically a bit more hidden away and not necessarily accessible. So we thought if we can capture the honour boards and make them available online, it allows people to interact with them and to learn from the information that they contain. The other aspect of the honour boards, and it's quite unique, I think, in many ways, is it does contain that social history aspect. The honour boards have been created by the communities 100 years ago, and here's that community thread coming through, that they wanted to recognise and acknowledge their members of their communities, local small communities, right up to civic involvement in councils. So they recorded that history then and acknowledged that people and the connection to their church group, to their sporting club, to their military installation, to the council that they worked for, or the primary school that they went to. So there's that amazing connection between family and service and community. So that was sort of the second sort of community thread, I guess. So we thought that important to be able to provide access to that history that was recorded 100 years ago. And a lot of the places no longer exist. The primary schools, many of them are long gone. So it's in some ways it might be the only way you can find out this piece of information. And it's not necessarily information that can be found in a service record. So that was a real key component for us to do that. Christine Cousins mentioned about the Geelong Peace Memorial, and that was a key component of what we wanted to unlock as well, to make the 9 panels of names available to the community who don't often get access to that. I've spoken, I suppose, a little bit about some of the parameters for the project, about honour boards. And people might ask, well, what is an honour board? What constitutes an honour board? And interestingly, throughout the project, we've grappled with that question because there are different forms. There is the traditional World War I honour board that we all sort of understand, the timber board, primarily timber, timber made and beautifully structured and detailed, beautiful details on it. But there are other forms of what we call, I suppose we've called an honour board that we've included in the project. Some of those can be the Education Department issued books that documented students at schools, and those books some of those books still exist within some schools. Again, it's not easily accessible, so we determined that that's a form of honour roll or honour board, and we've included that. There's some beautiful stained glass windows in churches that are a form of honour roll because they actually list the parishioners of that church. So it's not the traditional timber or brass honour board, but it's a form of honour board that's, again, internal to a building. So we thought, yes, we're going to include that and capture that as well. There's some amazing photo montage pieces out there that actually list the names of the servicemen and women, but also have a photograph of them with it, which is an amazing thing to get access to. And I'm sure there's a lot of family historians and social historians that will discover these and think, wow, we can really use this going forward.
So Mark, if I can just ask you, how did you find all of these boards?
Yeah, and that's probably the next thread of the community connection that we've had, community engagement. So as an organisation, Geelong Regional Libraries made the call out to the communities to tell us where they were, because we knew where some were. We knew about honour boards that may have existed and we didn't know if they still existed, but it was really about the community telling us where they were. So through media stories, through social media, we've made that call out. The councils at the member councils of Geelong Regional Libraries have made that call out as well through their networks. And the information filtered back from the community, hey, there's an honour board in this hall that we never knew about, or the Anglesea Sport and Recreation Club, we never knew. They've got an honour board in there, which is amazing. We would never have just found that without them telling us about it. So that's sort of the next thread of, I suppose, of that community connection, community engagement that's been absolutely pivotal to the project.
And speaking of the community, Mark, you've involved our local 3 main local community camera clubs and some professional photographers in this project. Why was that important for you to do?
Yeah, look, I think, Jeff, because as the project started to develop and that community story started to flow through it, I just thought it was important to engage the community wherever we could, and the opportunity to involve our three camera clubs was just something I really didn't think I could pass up. And from the first time that I know we touched base with Geelong Camera Club and Ballerine Camera Club through Lynn and Corio Bay Camera Club, there was an overwhelming interest to be part of it. And I thought, what an amazing response. And looking back now, I don't know that we could have achieved it without them. We've captured in excess of 170 honour boards photographed on site. And the other person that's been heavily involved in this is a lady by the name of Nicole Marie, who's a professional photographer who's done some amazing work in some really difficult places that we engaged her to do, such as the Peace Memorial in Geelong. So that involvement of Nicole in her practice and the community camera clubs in the project has been absolutely pivotal to where we've arrived today.
And Mark, I guess the obvious question, do you think you've got them all, or are there some gems out there we just don't even know about?
No, look, we continue to uncover stories about honour boards, and we have had some delay this year with COVID-19 restrictions. We have got a few more honour boards that we've identified in locations, particularly in the far reaches of Golden Plains Shire, that we had to put on hold because we couldn't go on site. That's a piece of work that we're going to embark on in the next few weeks to add to the site. There's also been uncovering of, I suppose, lost or not yet found honour boards through various sources from research that the Heritage Centre team have done. And recently, people who visit the site will see there are honour boards with the information. So the name of the honour board and the names of the people that appear on it on the website without a photograph. But we've uncovered that through newspaper articles and a newspaper run called News of the Week that actually had images of the honour board, so we can actually look at them. We just haven't found, if they still exist, where they are. So I guess we're still engaging with the community to come back and tell us, hey, I've seen that honour board, I know where it is. And if that happens, then we will go out there and photograph it and change that image over and put the current one on there.
Fantastic. And finally, Mark, do you think there's scope to expand the geographic areas that the project's already focused on, make it bigger, go further across Victoria?
Yeah, well, as was touched on, the 4-member councils of Geelong Regional Libraries was the scope for the project, the geographic scope. We have found some honour boards, interestingly, that originated within those boundaries, but actually now live outside those boundaries. We found one that's in the Melbourne Museum, for instance, that's included in the project. As far as expanding the project, I think there is scope for it. For instance, Colac Otway Shire will be joining the Geelong Regional Library Network in middle next year. So whether there's the opportunity to expand into that area and capture the honour boards that are in that area, and I know there are some out there, that's a possibility. We may need more funding, so I might be coming back and having another chat with Christine perhaps in the near future to see if we can secure a bit more funding for those.
Excellent. Good luck with that, Mark. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time this afternoon, and
you're welcome.
Joining us a bit later today for our Q&A session with the rest of our panelists. So thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff.
Now, I'd like to introduce our second guest panelist, Dr. Ruth Lee. Ruth taught Australian Studies at Deakin University, Geelong for 25 years and completed her PhD in 2011 on Geelong's first female doctor, Mary de Garis. In 2014, Ruth then published a book called Woman, War, Doctor, The Life of Mary de Garis. Ruth is also co-author with Heather Sherd of Women to the Front, the Extraordinary Australian Women Doctors of the Great War, which was launched by the Geelong Regional Library Corporation at another special event just last year. As you can read about in her book, Ruth discovered that at least 26 female doctors served unofficially in World War I. So a fascinating story, and welcome to you, Ruth.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Now,
Thanks.
Ruth, I was just going to say, as a professional historian and educator, why do you think projects such as this are so worth supporting?
Well, I think it gets down to a sense, building a greater understanding and sense of our own identity as Australians, and a knowledge and understanding of the past contributes to that. And I think that's true for regions such as Geelong as much as for larger cities. And Geelong's history is part of the wider picture of Australia's identity. And today I'm trying to contribute to examining women's contributions and experiences in World War I as a crucial part of our identity.
Fabulous. So, Ruth, what can you tell us about the I think it's almost 100 Geelong region nurses whose names appear on the World War I honour boards?
That's right. Yes. I can't speak for the whole group, Jeff, but today I was hoping to talk about 3 of the Geelong nurses: Kit McNaughton, Ida Mockridge and Ethel Gillingham. Kit was from Little River, as many of you may have read about her, but both she and Ida Mockridge trained at the Geelong Hospital. But I first wish to acknowledge the excellent work of Janet Baker, Cheryl Scott and Margaret Phelan, and Richard Cook, whose works my talk is based on today. Peter Rees's book about World War I nurses is entitled The Other Anzacs, which is a fine title. And it was only last week that I learned that this is what the Gallipoli veterans actually called the nurses. It was their badge of honour and reveals the tremendous appreciation and respect the soldiers had for the nurses, who saved countless lives. It also emphasises the close connection between the nurses and the soldiers. They had shared experiences as they worked near all of the main battlegrounds, sailed on the same ships, experienced the bombing raids, and lived in the same hospitals. Ultimately, they understood each other. So today, I wish to talk about Kit McNaughton, Ida Mockridge and Ethel Gillingham. After enlisting in the Australian Army Nursing Service in 1915, Kit and Ida met in Egypt. Even though they both trained at Geelong, they were in different years. They became firm friends and basically were transferred throughout the war together. The nursing authorities realised how important it was for people to have support in such difficult roles. So they became firm friends and were transferred to Lemnos, firstly, where the Gallipoli wounded were arriving. And the conditions for the nurses were very primitive. And here, not even the tents were available for the nurses on their arrival, which you may have seen if you watched the series Gallipoli Girls. The women slept the first few nights on the hillsides. After some months, they were both transferred back to Egypt, then in April 1916 moved to the Western Front in France. They experienced the effects of the battles of Bullecourt, Messines and the Somme. And then Ida and Kit were moved to the clearing station at Trois Arbres, excuse my French pronunciation, near the Belgian border in 1916. And there were 1,000 patients in their hospital. And they were under threat from gas bomb attacks. And again, we've seen a very memorable scene in the Gallipoli Girls at that time. Ida and Kitty were then repatriated back to England after seeing very intense service for 4 months. They were then transferred to the Australian Auxiliary Hospital in January 1917 in Kent, where wounded soldiers were recuperating, and there were much easier conditions for the nurses there. Both Ida and Kit worked in the operating theatres. Kit was then selected for the plastic surgery unit, which was quite pioneering in August 1917, Queen Mary's Facio-Maxillary Hospital at Sidcup. She was the first Australian nurse to work on Sir Newland's team, which was a great honour, and she stayed there for 9 months. In December 1918, the war was wound up. Prior to that, Ida was seriously ill with an infected throat for 3 months, and she left for Australia at the beginning of April 1919, her fiancé having been killed in the war. Kit kept working at Sidcup, became ill, and sailed home in July in charge of all the medical services on the ship SS Wiltshire, arriving in August in Melbourne in poor health, August 1919. She finally returned to Little River later that year, where she married and ultimately had 3 children. And for her heroism at Trois Arbres, Kit was awarded the Royal Red Cross First Class Medal in 1919, which was the highest award a nurse could win. And later, she received an ill health pension, but it was at 1/3 of the male rate. These were common experiences of the Army enlisted nurses, but there were also others, such as Ethel Gillingham, who was already in the UK when she joined the Second British Red Cross mission in 1915. Ethel worked on the Eastern Front, where the Australian forces were not posted, but she was working mostly with Serbian soldiers who were on the Allies' side. Ethel, like Kit and Ida, was very strong and loved the challenges of the work. And in early 1915, she sailed to Salonika with a private unit, a volunteer setup, and arrived at Vranje Banja, where she nursed typhus patients in the terrible epidemic there. In October, the Austro-Hungarian army invaded the town, and the unit they were all taken as prisoners of war. About 40 British and Australian nurses and 2 women doctors. Ethel's letter home described her ordeal as a prisoner of war, where the women were transported in cattle trucks, in trains through the snow across Eastern Europe, often starving in overcrowded conditions, and with a carriage catching fire, where Ethel literally had to leap out to save her life. And I wonder whether Ethel was one of the first Australian World War I women prisoners of war. I'll put that out there. If anybody can enlighten us, that'd be most interesting. After 3 months, the group reached Switzerland, where they were finally released. Ethel returned to London, kept on nursing, why wouldn't you, and reached Geelong in 1919. She married and had 3 children. While honour boards are the key to many war stories, there are people from World War I who do not appear on them. People such as the 26 Australian women doctors who also served through voluntary organisations. This was because women doctors were not allowed to enlist in the armed forces. And I refer here to Dr. Mary de Garis. Like Ethel, she worked on the Eastern Front with the Scottish Women's Hospitals in a 200-bed tent hospital in Northern Macedonia for almost 2 years. And for her work as a surgeon and Chief Medical Officer, she was awarded the Order of St. Stava 3rd Class by the grateful Serbian King, but received nothing from Australia. We have not yet found her name on an honour board.
Ruth, that is an extraordinary story. Thank you so much. What an amazing story.
Thank you, Jeff. I just hope that I would encourage people to go. The honour boards are a fabulous start, but if they can go beyond the honour boards, remember there were a lot of volunteers out there in World War I doing wonderful work as well. So I hope you can get started on that.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for putting all of that into context. It means so much more to us now. So thank you again, Ruth.
Thanks, Jeff.
And we look forward to chatting to you further a little bit later on in today's Q&A.
No worries.
Thank you. It's now my very special pleasure to introduce our next guest, Lieutenant Colonel Neil Smith, AM, retired. Neil proudly served 25 years in the Australian Regular Army, including active service, and has been decorated for explosive ordnance disposal duties. Neil has also spent over 2 decades running his business Mostly Unsung, researching military history, writing scores of books and articles, and engaging in a range of media and speaking work focused on those who served. So far, Neil has researched about 25,000 Australian and British service personnel from the First Fleet to the present day, using resources here in Australia and in the UK. Welcome, Neil.
Jeff, thank you very much. That's very kind words, but very sobering. I'm just feeling so terribly old at the moment. Nice to be here.
Join the club. Neil, as I mentioned, you've researched in detail about 25,000 service people over the years. And one of your mottos apparently is to never trust the board. Why do you say that?
The information that was recorded 100 years ago, 200 years ago, is fraught with errors and omissions. I mean, on day one, when a soldier joins the army, his platoon sergeant may take the name down incorrectly or something. And there we have it. All these years later, that information is corrupt. And I find that all the time. And I've done a lot of work on honour boards, for example. And so very often I find that what family law has said isn't quite right. So I stress the need to, having been given some information on Joe Blow, that you go a little bit further to try and identify him with a number and a rank and a period and a regiment. Once you've got them together, then you're in a better place.
So in other words, you're advocating getting the full story. What do you actually mean by that term, the full story?
Well, by the full story, I say it's wonderful to have a fellow's name or a lady's name, but then you need to be able to find out what that person did whilst he or she was serving, where they went, if you can get all of the dates and the places, the movements, the regiments, the battles, the sickness, the wounds, the jail time, whatever it might be, the medals. That's wonderful, but even then, it's only part of it. Because as I might have a chance later on to make comment on, if you can look further at that fellow's life after discharge, that's when it really brings it home. Now, it's all very well to be lauded with medals and streamers and so forth as a hero, and you come home marching on your horse and saluting and so forth, but it's a year later, it's 5 years later, it's 20 years later when it really starts to bite. And mum and the kids need some money, they can't get it. The pension that the fellow has got is totally inadequate. So that's the part of the story which really brings it home for me. And to do that, you've got to encapsulate everything from day one, literally, until a chap goes to the grave.
So I guess what you're saying, Neil, is that the honour boards, as good as they are just one piece of a very large puzzle.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say the same. Many viewers, of course, would have looked at National Archives for the copy of their fellows' dossier in a series called B2455. It doesn't matter. That, again, is only part of it. There are so many other records, both online, in hard copy, in books. I'm looking around at my library. I use my library every day. I mean, I use National Archives every day. There are so many other resources, Ancestry.com, the Australian War Memorial. All of them should be welded together to give you the sort of picture, the outcome that I'm trying to explain.
And for World War I veterans in particular, of that particular time period, is there some really specific references or places you go to get your references?
Yes, there is. I'll just mention a few of them. I've just mentioned one, that is the primary dossier that a man or a woman has got if they're in the army. To a lesser degree, they have a different sort of record if they were in the Navy. And of course, we didn't have an Air Force then, just in case somebody's a bit confused about that. So that's terribly important. But there are lots of other things as well. There are pay records. And one of the ones which I find particularly valuable and particularly moving are the Repatriation Department records, now called Department of Veterans Affairs, of course. But they're the records that I was alluding to a moment ago when you look at the struggles that the digger has with his family for decades after he has served. You pull all of that together and then also bring in the operational records. Where was the 10th Battalion on a particular day? Were they at Pozieres? Were they dashing up the heights facing the German guns underneath the shell fire in August of 1916? If you know what was happening to them, it gives you a much understanding and you're far more aware of what it was like for that chap or that girl when she was serving. So bring it all together and then write it in English, not in army talk, which is a hurdle in itself, and do it chronologically, and then you've got a marvellous outcome. Starting all, of course, conceivably from a name on the sort of on the honour rolls that we're talking about today.
Well, that's a wonderful segue into my next question for you, Neil. I've got the names of 2 servicemen from the Geelong region who appear on our honour boards, and I understand you've previously researched these 2 gentlemen. That is Sid Keown and Sloan Bolton, both of the AIF. Could you tell us just a little bit about both of those personnel, please?
I was terrified you were going to say somebody else then, but no, that's fine. These two chaps, Sid Keown, was one of about 15,000 chaps who used an alias in World War I, and the other one is Sloan Bolton, whose courageous service illustrates the ongoing effects and suffering of war service long after discharge. So firstly with Sid was a chemist from Geelong. He was an original 14th Battalion man, but he only made it as far as Egypt before Gallipoli. And Sid was jailed for drunkenness, insubordination and insolence before they shipped him home in disgrace. However, he wasn't put off because a few months later he re-enlisted, but very, very wisely, he used a different name. He used an alias. The alias was Johns. So Sid Keown became Sid Johns to avoid further scrutiny and the army becoming aware of what a ratbag he'd been initially with his service. So off he went this time, and he left with the 55th Battalion and ended up in France. And despite a couple more run-ins with the authorities, he finally came good and was promoted to corporal. His luck ran out, however, near a place called Mont St Quentin in the closing days of the advance towards the Hindenburg Line in August of 1918, when he was badly wounded by shrapnel and died later in the day at a casualty clearing station. So that's the first chap, Sid Keown. The second fellow that you mentioned, Jeff, is Sloan Bolton, another Geelong fellow, a train driver, in fact, and a family man. Now, Sloan Bolton, he served dismounted on Gallipoli with the light horse, didn't have his horse with him, and was evacuated sick, but he wasn't wounded. Life was fairly uneventful for Sloan for the next couple of years, working through Egypt and up into Palestine, fighting the Turks and the hostile Arabs at the time. And it really didn't liven up seriously until that infamous charge at Beersheba on the 31st of October 1917. Now, Sloan's gallantry on that occasion earned him a scarce Distinguished Conduct Medal. It's a very, very high-level award for gallantry. Sloan, his charmed life, however, finished a few months later when a Turkish shell blew off part of both of his legs in what is now northern Israel. Shipped back home and, as I said before, lauded a hero, Sloan and his family then had to forge a new life with the principal breadwinner a double amputee. No more medals, no more streamers, no more parades for Trooper Sloan Bolton. Rather, it was a matter of eking out a life for the next 30 years on a pittance of a pension and a few shillings here and there from charity. Now, these associated files, which we touched on a moment ago, make for heartbreaking reading. Letters, for example, begging for the repayment, get this, for the repayment of 1 shilling and 6pence for the train fare resulting from Sloan's trip down to Melbourne from Geelong with his wife to get his stumps retrimmed. Often it is the aftermath of war that requires the greatest courage from not only the diggers but their loved ones. And we need to always try and capture that whole story to pay the most appropriate homage to these veterans of yesteryear.
Neil, that is an extraordinary story. Thank you for telling it with such compassion and such knowledge and expertise. We really appreciate it. And I look forward to having a further chat with you shortly in our panelist Q&A session. Thank you so much. Now, last but certainly not least, our final panelist, Lynn Bryant, who's president of the Ballerine Camera Club. Lynn's been involved with the club for the past 7 years and the last 3 spent as president. She's a very talented and dedicated amateur photographer and tells me that she's learnt a lot since she joined the club. Welcome, Lynn.
Thanks very much, Jeff.
Now, Lynn, as president of the Ballerine Camera Club, what's been the experience for you personally and for other club members of being involved in this particular project?
When we were approached to be involved with this project, we were quite excited about it all. And there was a number of members who sort of put their hand up and said, yeah, we're in for this. It gave an opportunity for less experienced photographers to work with some who had a bit more experience. So they were able to work together on different sites, which is a good learning experience. For me personally, it was just a privilege to get into some of the places that we got into, particularly the Yarra Street Methodist Church, which has this amazing mural. It's not a board, it's a mural. And it was just incredible to see the different ways that people honoured their their servicemen or their community members that had gone off to war. Yeah.
So Lynn, as fascinating as that was, from a technical point of view, and you as a photographer, what were some of the challenges you faced when you turned up at these venues to photograph the local honour boards?
They were jolly high. They were stuck high on the wall. So we had to find ways of trying to, with them being high, then put them out of perspective when we photographed them. So we had to find ingenious ways of being able to get up to that level, and I won't go into that. We also had challenges with lighting, particularly in some of the churches where, and once again, I'm thinking of Yarra Street, there was beautiful stained glass windows, and no matter what we did, whether we used flashlights, the windows were so high that we couldn't stop that light coming in and reflecting on the board and giving us a shiny spot on the board, because if we had a shiny spot, then you couldn't see the names on the board. Some of the writing was a little bit faded, so you sort of had to fiddle around to make sure you got the right exposure to make sure that these names stood out, or that they didn't reflect and disappear, as it were. But no, on the whole, it was really quite, yeah, it was a challenge. But I think it also taught us that we can do lots of things. And it's a bit different photography to what we're normally doing, whether it's landscapes or whatever our passions are. So yeah, it was a wonderful experience.
And what did it mean for your club and the other clubs, Geelong Camera Club and Corio Bay Photography Club? What did it mean for all of you to be involved in such a community project?
I think it was a real honour to be involved in it. All three camera clubs were quite happy to be involved in it. Going out to various areas that we would never go to at any other time. While Bellarine concentrated basically on the Bellarine Peninsula, that's where a lot of our members were from, so we concentrated on that area. I think Corio Bay concentrated out on that sort of Corio Bay north area. And then we divvied up some of the city stuff. Geelong, I think, were doing they had members that were out in the Golden Plains Shire. So that's where they went. So we worked out, you know, where our members were from was where we went to do those photographs. Yeah, and I think all of the clubs, I know there were the people in Geelong Camera Club who also worked in pairs where they worked together. And sometimes we needed that because we needed someone to hold a flashlight up or something to try and get rid of the reflections and this sort of thing.
Now, Lynn, I understand you had a fascinating and unexpected encounter at the Marcus Hill Hall when you went out to take some photos there, and that led to a long-lost family connection. Can you tell us a little bit about that story, please?
Marcus Hill. Marcus Hill were getting their board renovated. I'll say renovated. It was being, the names were being re-gilted and the board was being fixed up. think from memory, the board originally came from Manoram, which is not far from Marcus Hill, from the old hall at Manoram. And that hall's been now pulled down, and they've got a memorial garden there for veterans that have returned. So the honour board ended up at Marcus. It took nearly the whole time from the time that we got the information until the very end, and we were in COVID by the time I could get access to go in and do the board. The other problem was that then the hall committee at that stage were also handing over the responsibility of that hall back to the City of Greater Geelong. So it was a very quick trip. A cousin of mine was on the hall committee, and he was there, and we were looking at the names, and there was a Bryant on there. And so we were trying to work out between the two of us who this Bryant was, and we thought it might have been an uncle. Anyway, another fellow comes in who was also involved with the hall committee, and it turned out that I think it was his great-grandfather. So they were related to us, but somewhere down a distant path. And that fellow had done a lot of research into his family history and had a book with all of the stories of their family in this actual book, which then incorporated this Bryant. They only lived in the Manoram area, just across the road from where I actually lived at one stage. And they were only in that area for about 2 years. And then he sort of went off overseas in work as well. And then I think came back and settled, I think it might have been in the Point Lonsdale area. But yeah, just interesting to see how, you know, we think it's one person and then someone else comes in and still part of that family, but distantly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just to close on this session, Lynn, I think you told me once that during the project you came across other ways that communities have remembered the men and women who served. Can you tell us briefly about that, please?
Absolutely. St Leonard's, one of the places, I think it might have been St Leonard's RSL, and I went down there on this particular day, and it must have been just after Armistice Day, and they had photographs as well as their honour board. They had photographs of all of their veterans, and on each photograph they'd had a red poppy. It looked absolutely fabulous. Wellington Primary School, while they didn't have an honour board, they had a book where someone had written the stories of their local members, local community members that had been involved in World War I. And so it was beautifully done in calligraphy, where they'd come from the area where they'd fought. And just to be able to read those stories was just incredible. And so that was another way of honouring their community members that had been away to serve.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lynn, for giving us that perspective from those literally on the ground going out to photograph these wonderful primary source records of Australian history and saving them for generations to come. I think it's a wonderful effort by all of the photographers involved from our 3 local photography clubs. So well done to you and your team.
I think we've got some great photographers, amateur photographers out there that can do good stuff. Thanks for having us.
Please stay with us now, Lynn, and I'll invite our other panellists back online. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if you're watching live and you'd like to post a question, just use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Welcome back, everyone. We've got a couple of questions in already. Indeed, a lot of comments have come in, and they've all been very congratulatory for the project. But Mark, there's one here, an obvious one, and this comes from an anonymous attendee, but have other Australian towns or regions adopted this idea for their communities?
Yeah, I have come across projects where honour boards have been captured. I don't think I've seen one that's dedicated a specific website with images and the recorded history that the honour boards contain in the way that our project has done that. So and made it searchable online. So yeah, there are various projects and there are various sites out there that have honour boards on them. So, and Monuments Australia is one, and we use Monuments Australia as part of our research because there are honour boards across the 4 member council areas that we've concentrated on, but there's not every single one of them by a stretch. I haven't done a cross-reference, if you like, but I know there are a lot of honour boards that we've captured that are not on Monuments Australia site, because that's not the entire focus of Monuments Australia either. So yeah, there are other sites out there, but I think ours is a bit unique in what it's done, what it's captured and how we've made it available.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. Neil, this question is probably best answered by yourself, I would think. It's from Gillian Heinzer. Honour board recognise people who were living in that area. Does this include people who were born and went to school in that area, but moved, say, to Melbourne to work and then enlisted from Melbourne, for example?
I believe so. From my experience
Yep.
with I'm sorry, who's talking? Sorry, Mark.
So,
Yeah, I believe that is the case. And of course, one of the big difficulties that you have are people who are transient, people who are workers, itinerant workers, whatever it might be, even perhaps people who were in school, what do you call it, when they're at boarding school, that sort of thing, when there's no family there, people who otherwise would slip through the cracks. And of course, that's one of the wonderful benefits of this project, is that you may not find a person anywhere else apart from on one of the honour boards, which we're talking about today, simply because they fit into the sort of category I mentioned before. There are many more other reasons that you won't find them as well, but I think I've answered the question as far as the honour board is concerned.
Sure. Mark, did you want to add to that?
yeah, thanks, Jeff. Further to Neil's comments, there are several school honour boards, primary school and secondary school honour boards on our website, and there are primary schools that no longer exist. There's a great honour board that's located in all places, the Maud Tennis Club Community Hall, that represents 3 primary schools that existed in that area. I think it was She Oaks, then it became Sutherland's Creek, and then another name before it even became Maud, going back into the 19th century, that lists students, primary school students that went to that school, obviously pre-World War I, but recognise them on the honour board. There is also a great story on the website about the Mission School honour roll. Now, the Mission School was a school for destitute children that was in Yarra Street established in 1876. We've got a newspaper article that talks about the unveiling of the honour board and lists all the names on the honour board post-World War I. The Mission School does not exist, nor does the hall that it was in. So the chances of the honour board existing are next to, they're probably maybe 1-2% in reality, but we've got the information and we've got the names for the children who were cared for in that place and actually went and served.
Thanks, Mark. This next question, possibly for you, Ruth, I think. What percentage of women's names are on the boards?
Look, I'm afraid I can't really answer that one. I'm sorry, I haven't done enough research to have such a broad overview.
That's fine, but I guess a question for me now is, would it be typical or general to say that not enough women are recognised on these boards?
Again, I couldn't really comment on that, but I believe there are about 90 names. Would I be right, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's around 100 now, around about 100, right. Ruth. As of this morning, we reached about 12,000 names in total across all the honour boards that we have listed right now.
Yeah.
There's obviously duplications of names because a member, a man or woman might be recognised on a couple of honour boards. And I think during your presentation, Ruth, there was some of the ladies' names were on both the Geelong Peace Memorial
Yes.
and their community board. So there is
Yes.
duplications of names,
Yes.
but I think it's around about 100
Well,
nurses at the
that
moment.
is getting up to, that is the estimated number. Sorry, that's the estimated number at this point in time of the Geelong nurses who did enlist. So yeah, that sounds pretty good coverage.
Fantastic. Now, I've had another comment here, and this comes from Jill Wheeler. Welcome, Jill, from the Linton and District Historical Society. She makes the point that it's worth mentioning that Australian honour boards list all men and women who served in First World War, but in the UK, for example, only those who were killed are listed. Possibly because our soldiers were all volunteers, not conscripts. Does anybody have any further light to shed on that?
I'm sure I've come across honour boards and honour books, rolls, anything which has got people's names listed on them in the UK. And yes, in some cases, there are certainly all those folk who enlisted, all those folk who served, not just those who were fatal casualties, no.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. A question now from Marty Hurst. Hi, Marty. Ruth, she's asking, are there plans to recognise the women doctors not on the honour boards? How can we rectify this oversight?
Look, there have been some moves. Heather Sherd in particular has been quite active. There is a memorial to the women doctors from Melbourne who served in World War I, and that's on the site of the original Queen Victoria Hospital in Melbourne, which is still there. It's, sorry, my memory's not good here. It's, whether it's the Methodist Church, I'm sorry. I can see it in my mind. It's
okay.
Prince Alfred have one. They've got a listing.
It was where the original Queen Victoria was established, in the church hall. It's a Wesleyan church, pretty
Prince
sure,
Alfred has got
in Lonsdale Street. So we have put a plaque there to the Melbourne women doctors. I believe Heather was active in, there's a plaque in the Pioneer Women's Garden in central Melbourne, similarly. But as for the other states, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Jeff, if I may, just on that, and Ruth and I have had several conversations about the Geelong Hospital doctors, nurses and staff honour board, which we haven't found yet.
Yes.
It is on the it is on the Geelong Honours End website, and again, it's one of those that we've got an image of, and it was huge. It was 3 metres, I think 3 metres tall. We've got all the data. We know it existed, don't we, Ruth?
Yes, it
But
existed.
and we suspect maybe it is hidden away somewhere. So we're going to put the call out here now to Geelong Hospital to ferret around down in the bottom of the bowels of the hospital there and perhaps uncover this honour board that I suspect does exist somewhere. It'd be great to see it and get it photographed again.
Okay.
It's interesting that you've got a doctor called Aberdeen on the honour on your database, but I had a quick look and he didn't serve in the military. So he's probably falls into another category of honorary doctors in the reserve or something like that. So you're going to find a lot of folk like that in World War I.
Yes.
Okay. Our final question, and I guess you can all have a say in this, but I'll start with Lynn. Wayne Myers is one of many people who have sent in some wonderful information and comments today. Too many for us to cover in the time we have left to us now, but thank you all for contributing. But Wayne is indicating there were lots of honour boards for World War I, some for World War II, but little later. How do we get to record those? And Lynn, my question to you, I guess, to start with, are the camera clubs up for it if we secure more funding, as Mark says, and we go out and expand this project?
Absolutely. It's just a great project to be involved with. It's and it's helping to preserve that information. Yeah, very happy to, and I think all of the camera clubs would be very happy to continue doing whatever they can to help out in preserving these boards. Totally.
All right. Well, thank you. We've unfortunately come to the end of today's session, but me personally, what a wonderful experience this has been. I've learnt an incredible amount, and I hope you have, and I hope you've enjoyed it. We've learnt that the Geelong Honours Them project has involved locating and photographing hundreds of World War I honour boards right across this part of Western Victoria. And the project has heavily relied on the hard work and dedication of many local heritage and community groups, National Trust, all of our smaller historical societies, and our 3 key amateur photography clubs here as well. Thank you to you all. Our sincere gratitude. Of course, the Victorian Government has also been a great supporter of this project, as we heard earlier from Christine, providing funding through the Victoria Remembers Major Grant Program. Now, if we've whetted your appetite and you've still not seen it, you can look at the honour boards online, head to the website, and I believe we will show the website immediately after this webinar, but it's at www.geelonghonorsthem.grlc.vic.gov.au. But if you go to the main library site, there will be links to it from there, and you can spend hours exploring its wealth of social history and appreciate the invaluable insight it provides into our local Anzac heritage. Thank you, panelists, Mark, Ruth,
Thank you, Jeff.
Neil and Lynn, for a great discussion this afternoon. It's been wonderful. On behalf of the Geelong Regional Library, thank you all for joining us here today, and a very good day to you all. Goodbye.